Welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. Join me each week as I interview experts who will share the science of sugar, sugar addiction, and different approaches to recovery. We hope to empower you with the information and inspiration, insights, and strategies you need to break up with sugar and fall in love with healthy whole foods so you can prevent and reverse chronic disease, lose weight, boost your mood and energy. Feel free to go to my website for details on my coaching programs and to access free resources, kicksugarcoach.com. Welcome everybody to an interview today with one of our keynote speakers at the Kick Sugar Summit. His name is Rich Holman, and let me read you his bio. Rich lives in Medellin, Colombia, where he's been operating a real estate company since 2007. At the age of 72, he had full-blown metabolic syndrome and was dying. Incredibly, he read a book about the perils of consuming sugar, which we will talk about shortly. And upon finishing the book, he met a holistic doctor who gave him a life-saving 21-day detox program. Now, at the age of almost 80, he is sugar-free, in great health, and off all medications. His first question 7 years ago was, why didn't my doctor tell me to stop eating sugar? Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't my doctor tell me that this was a major part of all of my medical issues? This led to 7 years of research and now the publishing of Killing You Softly, his book that we're going to talk about today, which blows the lid off the lies and cover-ups by big pharma, big health, and big food. He also shares the exact 21-day detox program that saved his life at the back of his book so that you too can experience the miracle of good health and the benefits and the blessings of sugar-free, of being sugar-free. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Florence. It's really great to be here. I feel very honored to be in the same dais with my heroes, Dr. Lustig and Dr. Richard Johnson and many others. Just an amazing conference. And you should be congratulated every year putting this on. You're doing a great international public service, so thank you so much. But I do have a surprise for you. I've done something that no other author has done. I don't have a copy of my book. I'm in Medellin and my author copies haven't come yet, so you can hold it up maybe, because I don't have one.
I would love to. And you know what I want to do? This thing is so marked up, and oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Let me do one thing. I'm going to change the view of my screen to speaker so that when I hold it up, people can see it really clear.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah, it's called Killing You Softly, How Sugar is Killing Us. And if there's only one book you buy this year, it's this book. And we're going to deep dive into all of the various different topics that Rich has covered in his book. But when Rich was telling me about all the different topics, his chapters, I said, Rich, are you scared you're going to get attacked? Like, are you afraid for your life? And he said, Florence, I'm an 80-year-old man. I got nothing to lose. I've got nothing to lose. I can say things in my book because this is just a self-published book that I spent 7 years researching. It's a labor of love and it is brilliant. But he said, I can say things in this book that the big guns can't. And he goes, I held nothing back. Everything is true. Everything is true, but I have the luxury of being able to speak the truth at a level that's unprecedented in any book in modern history around the topic of sugar. To me, when I read the book, The Sugar Blues, and Rich read the book, Sugar Crush, there are these books that awaken us. There are these books that put so much facts and information in our brains that there is no going back. That's what this book is going to do for the world. I'm hoping, I was saying to Rich, that I'm hoping it will be the new generation's Sugar Blues. So he self-published this, and I was just saying to him that I imagine that we're going to get this over to an agent, and they'll probably tighten it even more, or like whatever they'll do, they'll just sort of take it next level, and then we're going to get this into every bookstore in the world, hopefully multiple languages as well. And why is this book so important? I'm going to answer that question by telling you some of the topics, the chapter topics. How Rich has linked this to so many different aspects that other books haven't quite touched in the way that Rich does. For example, he talks about what is the sugar industry, and most of us could probably answer that question, but what he really does well is he talks about anyone who benefits from the selling of sugar as part of the sugar industry. And quite frankly, that ties into his chapter on, what chapter is that? It's chapter 13 and 14, where he says women's love affair with sugar and killing our kids. And he makes it quite clear that mothers have a very, very powerful role in what their children eat, what their husbands and their boyfriends eat, really what we're serving children in daycares and serving seniors in senior homes. We have a very powerful role in our modern day food culture. And right now, we're part of the sugar industry. We're enablers. We are the ones that are buying the marketing that says that Cheerios are part of a Heart Smart breakfast. Bullshit, right? We are the ones that were talked out of breastfeeding children for 2 generations because formula was better. We are the ones that are like the go-betweens between these big industries making profit at the expense of our children and all these other people that we influence. So I'm going to give you hit you more with a few more titles, chapter titles. How the sugar industry distorts the truth, follow the money, the disturbing trends of sugar consumption, the anti-sugar godfathers. I hope one day for Rich's sake that he's on that godfather spectrum, that before he dies, he knows that he's on that spectrum. The cocaine connection, the incredible lost opportunity to make people be healthy. And he ties it in with COVID. And the whole world came together. And we had such an opportunity. So I definitely want to dig in there a little bit with Rich today. And then he talks about the big 3, that what really does restore our health is simple and makes nobody any money. Eat whole foods. Well, maybe farmers. Eat whole foods, exercise, and get good sleep, right? So, and then he talks a bit about the 21-day detox. So, Rich, why don't we start with your story? Would you like me to share your photos or do you want to share your story and then cue me to your photos?
Let's do that.
Yeah.
I about 10 years ago, I started getting higher blood pressure, put a little weight on, low energy, aches and pains, and then my feet started getting inflammation. And the doctors do what they do. They give you pills. So they have me on, blood pressure meds and diuretics and statins and all the stuff. Yeah. But it was getting bad. And in a minute, you can show the picture of that foot. But I was 72 at the time. And I'm thinking, I'm dying. I sold half my stock back to my private company. And, a lot of my friends were gone. I'm saying, this is what happens. And just by pure luck, I read that book you held up, Sugar Crush. And it wasn't a book I meant to order, but the word inflammation caught my attention underneath the cupcake. I never thought sugar was bad, but I thought, I'll buy it. Let me see what they're talking about. Didn't read it right away. And after about 3 or 4 books later, I said, I'm going to read this thing. And about 50 pages into it, I'm starting to think maybe the sugar's not so good. But, I wasn't totally alarmed, but just thinking about it. But I did something I've never done before. I took the book to my office. I don't know why. Put it in my desk. And that day I'm interviewing Gus, a Colombian kid, his wife, he wanted to bring his wife in an interview. And I've done hundreds of interviews. Never had anybody want to bring their spouse in. But I said, okay, bring her in. I talked to Gus, gonna hire him. I turned to his wife. I said, what's your name? She says, Rasa. I said, oh, Rasa, what do you do? I'm a holistic doctor. Now, I never met a holistic doctor in my life, but I held up my book, said, oh, look at this. Maybe I should cut back on the sugar. And she looks at my inflamed face, my gigantic feet, says, you should do a detox. And I said, okay, send it to me. And basically, it's just no sugar, very low carbs, no booze for 21 days. And I said, I can do this. And I did it. So if you don't mind showing my foot for 2 or 3 years, and then, this is the way I looked every morning. I got up, and within 30 minutes, my foot, no, that's the other one.
Oh, darn,
Yeah,
I had them. Here we go.
there you go. Okay. So there's my feet. And it's this for years. And I didn't know what it was. It just, but my blood pressure is 160 over 100. I'm just a mess. 7 days after doing my detox, for the first 2 or 3, 4 days, I'm like tired, lethargic. I couldn't even finish my workout at the gym. But then day 6, my energy went up, and day 7, show the other picture if you would. Day 7, that was my feed. This is just 7 days after quitting sugar. I'm saying, oh my God. And my energy went through the roof. I went back to the gym, increased my weights. And on the program, you don't count calories. You're just not eating sugar and processed foods. That's it. I ate all I wanted, all the eggs I wanted, fish and salads and veggies and fruit and everything, and almonds and nuts, macadamias. I wasn't ever hungry. And by 21 days later, I'd lost 22 pounds, never being hungry, never dieting. And I said, what the heck just happened? And as you said, that started me on my journey. And my first question was, what did my doctor tell me? And then my blood pressure dropped 30 points. And I'm like, then I went off all the meds. And then I told my doctor that he needs to tell his patients to quit eating sugar. But that started the journey. And the more I got into the journey, I discovered a lot of things besides sugar being bad. But the thing I spent a third of my book on is the massive cover ups by the moneyed interest. This is the biggest cover up in human history. There's no bigger one. Sugar kills more people than the wars, infectious disease, drugs, drunk drivers, you name it. It's killing more people, destroying more lives, and growing almost exponentially. And yet, not a peep. And I go into the book, I talk, why don't we know about that? I mean, think about this. This headline should be every day in the front page of every newspaper. The kids today in the United States will be the first generation in 250 years of the Republic that will not outlive their parents. That should be a front page article. Think about that. And, it gets back, as you mentioned, to the kids. But this started me on my journey. And I don't know how many people out there ever saw that movie Network with Faye Dunaway, Bill Holden, and they had this newscast in Howard Beale. And it was, won Academy Awards. And the best scene in the movie was he's getting fed up with all the bad news in the world. And he goes out, walks across the stage in a live broadcast, opens the window, and shouts outside, tells everybody to open their windows up and shout out, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take this anymore. That's the way I felt. Those SOBs almost killed me with the crap that they were feeding me. And the solution is really pretty simple. And I get into that in the book. But I think where a lot of the other problems we have is that they like to keep us divided, distract us, and dumb down, and too many choices. There's too much confusion out there. And my chapter on KISS, I keep it simple, stupid. It's just very simple. Just don't eat sugar. It's all you got to do. Don't worry about the other stuff. Start with that. And then from there, after you do that, you can do all other things to optimize your life and your health and live longer. But start with the basics. Do not eat sugar. And so I get into that quite a bit. We're on a real tough mission because the money being made by the money interest, by big pharma, big health, big food, big sugar, it's trillions of dollars. And they're not going to give that up easily. But I have solutions.
Yeah, I was going to say that really struck me when you were talking about the sugar industry in your book. And there's this light bulb moment for me when you were talking about the drug cartels. And I was imagining back to some of the movies I've seen where the mafia had friends in the government, and the government was sort of working with the mafia. And I thought, how's that any different from what we're doing right now? Right? That big pharma and big health and big food and all those they're peddling a drug. They are drug cartels. We know it's addictive. We know it's damaging, but there's big money. And governments and the FDA and other organizations that you go in very great detail are all involved. They're all involved in perpetuating this scam. Do you want to go there? Tell us a bit more about what you discovered in your research about just how deeply corrupt that whole sort of unholy alliance is.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's always about the money. And I talk about that in the book, Follow the Money. And the money being made is just unbelievable. First of all, on the front end, there's people making money selling processed foods and sugar products. They're making money on the front end. That's big food. Now, but on the back end, the people making the money is big health and big pharma. And this is starting to come out more and more. But my one of my favorite sayings about medicine today is that the doctors are trained to treat the symptoms of sugar addiction. They treat the symptoms. They don't treat the cause. Nobody makes any money. The doctor says, go home, eat real food, exercise, and sleep. Nobody makes any money, as you said, except the farmers. So now, why is that? Why are the doctors trained that way? Well, first thing is less than 1% are trained in nutrition. It should be 100% trained in nutrition, but it's less than 1%. And less than 2% of medicine is preventive medicine. It should be 75%. But why? Who influences the curriculums of medical schools? Our friend Big Pharma. They're on the advisory boards. They do the research grants. They're intimately involved with medical school curriculums, and they don't want anything to change. And because the money they're doling out, the med schools and the Congress and everywhere else, nothing is changing. They're making so much money, and it's just so sad. And speaking of Big Pharma, in the world today, there's 203 countries. 203 countries. Only 2 allow direct-to-consumer advertising from Big Pharma to the consumer. That's New Zealand. I have no idea why. And the other is United States. I'm sitting here in Medellin. I get access to U.S. television. The other night, I'm watching CNN, and I'm also watching Fox News. And there was 10 ads, and 9 of them were peddling pills,
No
peddling
way.
pharmacy. It's just, and they're the biggest advertiser on the legacy media, on the internet media. They're the biggest everywhere. So you wonder why we don't hear, oh, it's really going on. You think somebody wants to lose their job or lose their ad revenue. So not a peep in the front page. Now, there'll be some good articles back on the health section, in the New York Times or even the Washington Post, but it's like it's buried. Only people read that are people already healthy normally. It's such a massive cover up, but they're everywhere. And one of the things I just went crazy on, and I've got 70 footnotes about this in the book, but they control Washington, the money interests. I used to think it was just the Department of Defense, with the war machines, but no, you know, big pharma's in the FDA, they're in the CDC, they're in the NIH. They get people all over there, and they come in and out, and people leave. They go to work then as the government. They go to work for lobbyists. They go to work for big pharma. It's one big family in there, and they're controlling and influencing everything, everything. And it's like the fox is in the henhouse, and nobody knows or nobody is aware of it, and it's so sad. And I get arguments that people say, well, all you got to do is use discipline and and exercise, you'd be fine. Well, no, people need informed consent. People in the world, especially the United States, do not have informed consent. So I talk about, this incredible cover up and massive misinformation and the lies they've told for the last 50 years. My favorite lie is back in the 60s when there's some information came out, against sugar. The sugar industry rapidly said, we got to do some more tests. And they started doing tests on rats with sugar, and the rats kept dying of cancer. So they just buried that research. They didn't want to say a word about that. And then Ansel Keys came out, with the whole thing, fat's bad for you. And we all believe that. I did a no fat diet in the 90s. And, I had my bread with jam on it, but no butter. The lies, the cover-ups, the misinformation, it's just incredible. So that got me really crazy because I've got 7 years of this, and it's still coming out. And it's so hard. What chance does the average person have? Because sugar, and this chapter, I'm really proud of it. Nobody's done this chapter, but the cocaine connection. You saw the chart. There's 15 characteristics of sugar and cocaine, and they're all the same.
Yep.
They're both white. They're both processed. They both come from plant. They both can be smoked. They both can be chewed. They both are used socially. They're both highly addictive. They're both bad for your health. They both in the original form of Coca-Cola. On and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But cocaine at least has one good thing. You can lose some weight doing cocaine. At least it's got one benefit. But it's just amazing. And you talk about the drug cartels. Pablo Escobar who was a top 10 richest guy in the world peddling cocaine. If he'd have peddled sugar, he'd probably be the richest guy in the world. The guy was a master marketing and genius on marketing. And but on the solutions, though, the solution that I really am trying to get across and push is what I call the tobacco template. Because we do have an example of a success story. And before your time, but when I was a kid growing up, I'm 11 years old. I'm watching black and white TV and Gunsmoke's on. Advertisement comes out, and his doctor comes walking out smoking a cigarette with a smart stethoscope. And the voiceover is, more doctors prefer camels. They give you more energy, better for you, better for your health, yada, yada, yada. And of course, I said, wow. And, all the kids were smoking candy cigarettes, and Joe Camel comes out. And an obvious carcinogen like tobacco smoking, it still took 50 years to get the word out, to get people informed consent. It took getting it off the advertising, labeling, taxing it, taking on the schools, taking on the hospitals, government behind it, doctors behind it, public service announcement. It took 50 years to get tobacco smoking from 42% down to 12, 13%. And, people can still smoke, but they're informed. Sugar, no, there is not informed consent. But we got to use that same template. We got to get everybody together. Unfortunately, the $1 trillion money interests running the big show, big pharma, big food, big health, and the 1,834 lobbyists for big pharma running around Washington, D.C., they're not going to let that happen, nor will they advertise. So it's got to be the people. It's got to be people like you and everybody that's speaking. We all got to, we're in this thing together because the world's health is being destroyed. And the kids today in the United States will not outlive their parents. And we've got to change that. And it can be changed. It changed for me in 21 days. Anybody can do this. So I try to get that point across. And what I challenge everybody to do is, here's the detox. It's in my book. It's just 21 days out of your 30,000 days. That's 0.007 of 1%. It's just 21 days. But I say one thing. If you're going to do the detox, do it right. Don't cheat. Don't think, I'll have a little bit of sugar. Don't do it. Because in 21 days, you'll experience the miracle, and that will guide you the rest of your life. So if you do that, you're set. And then you're going to be set for your family and your friends and your kids. You'll never waver once you know the truth. Now, it's not easy, but it's just 21 days, and you can do it.
Thank you, Rich. And I will say, in defense of those of us that fall on the addiction spectrum, that it might not be enough just to do it for 21 days. That will be enough for you to experience the miracle, for your body to go, oh, I do like this better. I want to be your ally now. I'll remember this experience of feeling better. But for those that fall on the addiction spectrum, we just frustrate ourselves, Rich, because we're like, oh, I feel better. I want to do this forever. And then there's going to be a moment where we think, oh, I'll just have one bite. It's my daughter's wedding cake or something. It's my birthday. There's nothing else to eat. And then boom, we're hooked again. And then it can be weeks, months, sometimes years before we find our way back into the whole food miracle. So yeah, I just don't want to leave anyone with the impression like, oh, 21 days and I'm cured and everything's good and I'll never go back. That might be true for Rich, and it's often true for men. It's not always true for women. We are for sure more addicted. And Rich, I don't know if you've seen this research. It was the tiniest reference, and I haven't had a chance to dig more into it, but it was research that came to light for me when I was looking at the rat park study. Are you familiar with the rat park study? Right, where these rats were addicted in cages, and then they put them in these enriched environments, and high percentage of them weaned themselves off cocaine or sugar or alcohol, whatever it was that they were hooked on. But a certain percentage never did, that they stayed addicted and died of whatever horrific disease they died of. But in that study, there were other studies trying to replicate it. There was an interesting little one line about they realized that they needed to make sure they were doing this research on both female and male rats. All the research was being done on male rats previously, but when they brought female rats into the mix, totally changed the numbers. And they said there's clear evidence that sugar is more addictive to female rats. And that's all they said. And that was it. I haven't been able to find any more. But it's interesting. And you sort of address that, and you say it might be tied to hormones. But do you want to speak to that whole sort of why it seems that women are the ones that are really hooked into this, and we're the ones that are eating it, and we're the ones that are sharing it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I talk a lot about this in my chapter, you know, the women's love affair with sugar. And it's and also in the killing our kids. Let me go back to kids for a second, because all the events with kids tie around sugar, you know, birthdays, Christmas, Easter, you name it. It's just part of the
Halloween.
whole society, everything, Halloween. And I remember when I was a kid, Halloween, I had get my bags of candy. Somebody tried to give me an apple. You know, it wouldn't even make it home. You know, I just throw it out. But with the women, I know the hormonal thing is part of it, but I think it's more of a social thing. You know, it's something which the gals sort of enjoy doing together. It's, oh, we're gonna have it's, whereas the guys, it's the booze for them. You know,
Yep.
booze is their sugar.
Yep.
So it's not the guys are innocent. It's just that, you know, alcohol metabolizes very similar to sugar and causes some of the same effects. So I think we're both guilty. And it's just, the problem is with the women, you know, the gatekeepers. They're the biggest influence on the kids and the boyfriends and the husbands and the girlfriends. It's like, we got to get them on board. We have to. And it's like, what I think is so sad is, by them eating sugar, it affects their skin, it affects their energy, it affects their weight, it affects their sleep, and it takes away from their essence. And I think it's sad. You know, you guys got to be the leaders, you know, not the followers. And I was just telling you today in my book, I've got people around the world holding my book up in front of a windmill in Holland, or countryside in England, or on a golf course. So far, every photo has been a guy. I haven't had one woman yet hold the book cover up. And that cover, that book, if you'll hold it up and look at that face, that's not a man's face. That's a woman. I
I'm
really
going
wrote
to
this book
talk so
trying
that
to,
it switches over to my screen. So here it is. Yeah, there's the
yeah,
image.
no, that's not a man. So, uh, you know, all we can do is do our best. But I have some good news for me personally. Once I quit the sugar, I do not crave it. I don't even want it anymore. It almost nauseates me. But I never used to like fruit because fruit wasn't sweet enough. Now I love fruit. Fruit, it just explodes now. And same thing with salads and veggies. They used to be, that was the last thing I'd eat if I'd ever eat it. Now it's the first thing I eat. So your whole taste buds change. And point we haven't made yet, and I love this point. Dr. Richard Johnson, who's, I really love his books and his talks, and he's got this anthropological background, and I like the way he really sets the stage, because, you know, mankind and primates have been around for millions of years, Homo sapiens for 200,000 years. But for all those years, until the last 150 years, the one thing that wasn't there basically was sugar. Sugar wasn't really there. It was, you know, fruit, maybe a little bit of honey, but sugar just came around, you know, in the last 600 years, but it came as a rarity. The cost of sugar was like 200, it was more expensive than caviar. And now it's 1/200th the cost of caviar, because it didn't come out until the last 150 years, and really mainstream in the 40s and 50s after the Second World War, because World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression, sugar didn't really get out. But once it got mainstream in the processed foods and out, it's just wreaking havoc. And I would love to see somebody, Florence. I couldn't find this data. It's so hard to get. But I'd like to see somebody take 10 charts and put them in a book, and just put the first chart, the sugar consumption per capita for the last 100 years, which will look like this. And then do a chart for cancer, coronary heart disease, chronic kidney disease, depression, Alzheimer's, uh, high
Diabetes.
blood pressure, all of it. It's all the same chart.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might say, well, it's a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. It's really what's happening. It's the honest to God truth. And yet they're getting away with it. The money interests are getting away with it. They're running the show. It's so sad. And going back to our friends' tobacco business, finally we got on those guys. The last tobacco web is 1972 in the Johnny Carson show. And pretty soon the lawsuits started hitting. The states were getting on $1 billion. And so tobacco industry said, what are we going to do? You know, when the 1980s, The biggest leverage buyout in the 1980s was a tobacco company buying RGA and Nabisco. They bought in control of 3 processed food companies. Now they're all over in processed foods. They're taking one addictive poison, nicotine, into another called sugar. Instead of Joe Camel today, the kids don't have Joe Camel anymore. They got Tony the Tiger. I mean, they're just putting that same marketing stuff they did to hook the kids and hook the people into the processed food business. It's a sin. It is a crime. And there's nobody stopping them, but except people like you and like the people that are speaking. But it's an uphill battle. But we got to win this thing.
Mm-hmm.
If let's do it at least for the kids, if not for ourselves.
Totally. That is exactly how I feel. Yeah, children deserve to have happy, healthy childhoods. And if we want to, there's this really powerful part in your chapter, under Killing Our Kids, where you talk about how, back when you were in your mom's womb and growing, your mom was a smoker. No, she wasn't. Was she a smoker?
Yeah. Smoke and drink.
She smoked and she drank, right? And we're like, oh, that's terrible. Mothers shouldn't do that. So now responsible mothers are not smoking and drinking when they're pregnant, but we're eating sugar every day, all day. Like, yeah, oh my gosh, it's such a powerful line. And you talk about how because of that, babies are being born obese, pre-diabetic, and addicted to sugar right out of the womb. And there's barely a peep about it.
Yep. Dr. Lustig is the one, of course, was the first one to really come out, start blowing that, sounding that alarm. I know it broke his heart, but he figured it out very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of the things I talk about in the book is, how do we reward our children when they're good? What do we give them? Give them sweets. Mm-hmm. We poison our kids when they're good. That's brilliant. Mm-hmm. That's really brilliant. Mm-hmm. But if we get these little kids and get them trained at the beginning and get them onto real food and tell them they'll be the biggest advocates. They will lead the charge if they have a chance. Mm-hmm. But the mothers and the fathers aren't giving those kids a chance. Mm-hmm. The kids are misbehaving. What do we do to shut them up? Give them something sweet and they shut up. Mm-hmm. And then the dopamine starts hitting them. And then pretty soon they get the cravings, the crashes. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, there was no kids ADHD. Nobody's taking Ritalin. Kids weren't all crazed. And it's like, it's the sugar. And I think today, and I didn't cover this in my book because I didn't want to be too controversial, but I think about all these school shootings, which I never heard of before until the last 10, 20 years. Imagine you take a kid, a boy, he's down in the basement, all he's watching video games, and he's eating, he's drinking Red Bulls and big gulps and Coke and candy and all this crap, getting no exercise. And we know what sugar does to the brain. We know what it does, disrupts the gut biome, how it affects serotonin. It's all covered in detail by Dr. Lustig and many other books. I mean, we know wreaking havoc. No wonder they're going nutsy and doing stupid stuff like shooting up a school. It doesn't surprise me at all. I hope someday somebody connects those dots. I love Dr. Christian Palmer's book, Brain Energy, where he's saying psychiatrists and pills ain't working, guys. And now he's putting people on keto diets and now they're doing clinical trials, having amazing results with bipolar depression, and it's like, we got to do this thing. We really do. The science is there. The evidence is there. We got to get mainstream somehow in this. We got to get past the barriers, the blockages of big food, big pharma, mm-hmm. and big sugar, big health.
Yes. And I would say, and I have never said this publicly, and I think it's okay that I do. I almost lost my own daughter, Rich, to sugar addiction. Yeah, she was raised on whole foods. I was 100% whole food woman, pregnant, although I did have one pumpkin pie and one cheese sandwich the entire pregnancy. But after that, I was hell-bent on raising her sugar-free. I knew too much about it. And so she was, but my family was sneaking sugar on the side. They kept thinking, oh, you're going to make this kid weird about food and you're depriving her and you're too extreme. And I'm like, no, if you knew what I knew, you would not. This to me is you're just offering my daughter a cigarette or something toxic. Anyways, fast forward, she got it though. Like by the time she was in her teens and she was out and about, she would come to me to say, "Oh, mom, like I really like it. Like I can see it's addictive. Like I have a little and I light up and I want more." Fast forward, she's kind of spent most of her childhood years mostly sort of in and out of the junk, was very depressed and anxious in her 20s. And there were stretches where, Rich, I didn't know if she was going to hang in there. I didn't. I did not know. There was times I'd look at her and I'd think, honey, this is brain chemistry and it's so tied to the junk and the partying and it's the whole picture. And one day she said, either I leave this planet, I can't do this, or I listen to you and I'm ready. So she went on a whole food diet. She dropped it even more. She went keto, and she'll tell her own story one day. She's an up and coming in this space because she is the first to look you dead in the eye and say, everything Rich is saying in this book is been my lived experience. All, not just Rich's books, but all the people who are writing and talking. We can't make this shit up. It's true. This is the facts. These processed, refined foods are truly impacting you from head to toe and very deeply at the brain level. Chris Palmer's book that you just mentioned, Brain Energy, links sugar, refined processed foods to metabolic health tied to mental health. This is real. So, yeah.
Well, here's another headline that you don't see in the New York Times or in CNN. The United States spends $4.3 trillion on healthcare. $4.3 trillion. Now, that's a big number. In fact, it's the third biggest GDP in the world behind China and Japan. That's a huge number. So we got the best doctors, the best trained, the best facilities, and we spend more money than the next 10 major countries combined. And what do we get for that, Florence? Because the United States was the first generation sugar addicts. We started the processed food business and all the other stuff. So what are we getting for the 4.3 trillion? We're number 47 in life expectancy and dropping. Number 47. You got poor countries with better outcomes than that. Now, of that 4.3 trillion, Dr. Lustig has pointed, and other doctors, is that, hey, 75% of that's due to chronic disease. 75% in chronic disease is caused by what you eat, by sugar and processed foods. Now, 3.2 trillion makes that number 5, tied with India for 5th place in GDP. Those are horrendous numbers. And what's causing that? It's what we're eating. Now, the United States has 128 million diabetics and pre-diabetics. Almost half the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And yet, this isn't headlines. It should be. It's just horrendous. But it's part of this massive cover-up, this control the big money interests have. So I just, it just grieves me to see this. And now it's so obvious to me. And I feel so blessed to be at almost 80 years of age here and all medications, and feeling great. It's, we gotta get this mainstream. We have to do it somehow, some way.
And I imagine that right now we're still at the phase where the early adopters, that's you and I, those of us who for some reason we were miserable enough that we were willing to read a book about sugar and have it totally light up, change our lives. And then we can't help it. We can't help but get the calling to pass this along. When you really have this, you will feel called to pass it on. You can't not. So the early adopters, we're all teaming up. We're doing summits. We're writing books. We're supporting each other. Yep. And we're waiting for this to be a big enough group, right? And for all the early adopters that are in the media, that are in hospitals, that are in daycares or in schools, right? All of them are slowly waking up, and we are the leaders. So we're not the innovators. We're the middle group that are reading the Lustigs and going, I get this. I'm going to do my part. And then the early majority start going, oh, there's something here. We should change policies. We should have a day's care policy that all snacks have to be whole foods. And they start to make it mainstream. And then there's a tipping point. But we're still in the early adopter stage here. So we're doing our part. But if you're early majority and you're skeptical and you're like, I don't know, your job is to just do more research, because that's what the early majority. Oh, there's this weird echo. That's what the early majority need. They just need more science, more conviction, personal experience with it. So, yeah, we'll have
Well,
to.
we're starting to get, actually, since I published the book this past month, I'm starting to see more headlines coming out. I wish I'd had them in the book, but Washington Post, who's not my favorite publication, but they came out with a huge article linking, life expectancy to ultra processed foods and sugar. I mean, God bless them. That was great.
Yep.
Very detailed. Of course, it's buried down the health section. It didn't make front page. It should.
Yes.
Wall Street Journal. I love this article. They had the one about how come people in the United States go to Europe and gorge themselves eating and come back to States and they've lost weight.
Huh.
And they said, oh, Europe gets 12% of the calories from ultra processed foods. The United States gets 57%. Duh. Should be a front page, again, in the health section of the Wall Street Journal. It's just the news, the information is out there. And it's to us that are informed, it's so obvious. But sugar addicts are like cocaine addicts. You tell a cocaine addict, maybe you should quit. They look at you like, you know, it, people are, sugar is more addictive than cocaine. There's no question about it. So we've got an uphill battle, but as you said, it's got to start coming from every source and eventually get more of the doctors are starting to get on board.
They sure are.
And I love what some of the things that some of the I mean, I'm not picking the doctor, but I love what, like Dr. Lustig talking about, we got to start treating the symptoms of the sugar addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the cause, not the symptoms. It's going to happen. And so as more doctors get involved, and some of the news media starts getting the front page and more people, and we start communicating, especially on the internet for now, mm-hmm. I think we're going to get there. And hopefully it won't take 20 years. Dr. Lustig's referred to this 30 or 40-year cycle, like seatbelts and tobacco. Mm-hmm. We're in that cycle. Mm-hmm. We started the process, mm-hmm. but we need to accelerate it because people are dying every day from mm-hmm. this crap, and mm-hmm. babies are getting diabetes, and people's feet are getting cut off. And you want to get in the COVID story? It's one of my favorite.
Yes. And I just want to say one more thing about doctors before we move on. I've interviewed hundreds now through my 9 years of doing summits, and I have never yet met a doctor. I'm sure they exist, but I personally have not yet met a doctor who hasn't said, when I said, how did you get started? How did you know you want to be a doctor? And many of them say, when I was a kid, I just knew. Or they'll say, I just knew that's what I wanted to be. They truly have a calling. That most doctors honestly go into their field to make a difference in the lives of people. Either they had someone who was a sick parent, a sick sibling, they had a father who was a doctor, or something like that. They felt inspired to move into a field that they thought that would be meaningful. They can make a meaningful difference. And this is especially true in countries where doctors are not particularly well paid, actually. Even there, you hear that same theme. And what we know now is that this food culture malfunction is affecting doctors too. They have one of the highest rates of suicide. Did you know that?
That surprised me.
Yeah, it's not surprising. They are experiencing the same frustration at the limitations of drugs and surgery for chronic disease. They are extremely effective for the 25% of the times when we are in an accident or an infectious medical condition or an injury. Infection and injury, genius. Drugs and surgery, for sure. But the chronic disease, that's because we're not moving our bodies and we're eating crappy foods and we're socially disconnected and all those things, right? Those are not going to be addressed well, because all they do is mitigate symptoms, address symptoms, not the root cause. And these doctors are as frustrated and demoralized and burnt out as the patients that keep coming to them for more help, but all they're getting is more prescriptions, right? So I just wanted to share that.
And speaking of the doctors, it's almost like a cattle call. Do you know the average time that a patient spends with a doctor now in the United States is 7.5 minutes?
Wow.
I mean, it's just,
that's
it really is.
Doctor. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't get into medicine to just do, here's a pill, next. Like you can't go home at the end of the day and feel like, wow, I have a connection to my patients and I'm making a difference.
Well, towards the end of my book, my chapter called Futuristic Future, I talk about the future. In the future, instead of 1% of doctors being trained in nutrition, it'll be 100%. Instead of 2% preventive medicine, it'll be 75%. I mean, it's going to be a whole different world in the future, and we're going to get there.
We're going to get there.
But yeah, but you're right. But I had to write this chapter on the COVID because when I looked at what happened, first thing is, because I know what was going on with sugar and processed foods and big pharma and I said, all right, where's the money? And when I first heard about COVID, it was like November of 2019. I said, oh, this looks like it could be a nasty flu coming. So I started researching it. And the best I could tell in the early 2020 was it's an inflammatory virus. In other words, if your body's in an inflamed state, you might have a problem with this virus. Now, I never had a flu shot in my life. And I said, well, gosh, I wonder. But I said, no, I'm not, I'm working out, I'm exercising, I'm sleeping, I'm not inflamed, my immunity's good. I'm getting sunshine, I'm going to the gym. I'm not in an inflamed state. So, I'm not going to get too worried about it. And then all of a sudden they shut us down in March of 2020. Fortunately, the day before I bought some weights to take my house every day. One day I do weights, the next day I walk around my building illegally. I'm supposed to be outside, sit in the balcony, getting sunshine, popping my vitamin D, eating salads and fruit. And then I watched this thing hit. And then I saw what the government did. The government says, all right, you just stay home. No more gyms, no more beaches, no more sunshine, no more exercise. Sit at home and we'll weather this thing out. Wear your mask and then take this vaccine, because if you get it, you won't, if you take the vaccine, you won't get COVID. Well, then they later said, well, you won't spread it. And then later they said, well, you won't die or get it a second time. All this stuff was untrue. Meanwhile, Moderna stock went from 14 to 440. There is the money. The vaccine was not free. The vaccine manufacturer making billions of dollars. But what they did then is the government had an opportunity to have all the people scared to say, hey, let's do this. We're going to get free gym memberships and send anybody who wants to work out, join a club. And we're going to give discounts on real food. We want everybody to exercise, get sunshine, and eat right so you build up your immunity and not be in an inflamed state. And we'll beat this thing together. They did the opposite. They locked us up. No sunshine, no exercise. Processed food sales went up 25% during the pandemic. And besides that, drug use went up, alcohol. And then it was like they made us sicker. Now, the United States, the richest country in the world, with their 4.3 trillion, how do they do with the COVID deaths? Well, 4% of the world's population, we had 16% of the deaths.
16?
16.
16, wow.
16% of the deaths was 4% of the world's population. And it's like, you couldn't say anything about that, because you said anything about that, you get censored. That should be a headline. Not. And one of the things interesting, I've really been following very closely Robert Kennedy's, because he's really on a big farm in the corruption of Washington with the money interest. And I mentioned in the book that, the week that President Trump was going to be inaugurated, he reached out to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be his vaccine czar, because Trump was sort of concerned about vaccines. He had heard about autism, other stuff. So he wanted Kennedy to take it over. And so Kennedy made an appointment with Fauci and some others. And within 48 hours, suddenly the staffer called Kennedy and said, no, we don't need you. And that same week, Pfizer donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural campaign and put two of their people in the FDA and the CDC. And I was like, wow. Of course, Trump never knew. He's like a bull in a china closet. He had no idea. But it's just another example of the controls and of the money interest. And it's just so sad, because our government could have had the people get healthy, scared them into being healthy. And it did just the opposite.
Yeah.
So it just,
yeah.
I had to put that chapter in there.
Yeah. And I wanted to sort of clarify that this is not to weigh in on the vaccine debate. It's about whether or not, the whole world came together to try and protect each other. And I don't know that a gym membership would have been a good idea. I think there was some wisdom to just stay home. Let's see if we can just kind of get this to ride by. But in the meantime, go out into parks. If 6 feet distance was sound advice, great. Just separate, go out into parks, get out on your balcony, Yeah, one of the pieces too around COVID, because we all watched this, right, was whether or not we should be allowing our kids to get it so that they would have natural immunity. And one of the arguments is that no, you don't get natural immunity. The vaccine will give you better immunity. And so, like, every argument for the vaccine, like, this is the solution. This is the vaccine is the solution. It's the same paradigm. Surgery, pharmaceuticals, those are the solution to health issues. But in this case, I think you make such a compelling argument that that paradigm is limited, and it has a major money behind it. It's vested interests that keep us from broadening it to look at the holistic picture of what truly does help people build immunity against viruses such as COVID and others.
Allow us informed consent. Allow us to talk to our doctor and discuss it. But the doctors couldn't do anything. They were locked up. They said anything, they'd lose their jobs.
Yeah.
But it's another thing about the money interests.
Yeah.
They run the show, and they've corrupted Washington. And the Democrats used, and I'm an independent, but the Democrats used to be the party, against big business, against war. And now, the big businesses are running them. The big farmers are running, the big health's running them. The neocon. It's like they run Washington. The money runs it, and the people are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And here, the greatest country in history is the sickest country in history. We're in a third generation sugar addicts, Lawrence. And I hate to think what the fourth generation will look like.
Yeah.
When our sick kids today who outlive their parents have kids, how are those babies going to be?
Yeah.
It's sort of scary.
Yeah. And I think that two things. I don't know that America is the greatest country that ever lived. I think that its historical legacy will look like this. You were involved in a whole lot of wars you shouldn't have been involved in. You brought your franchise fast food, junk foods to almost every developed country, and you were predatorial about it in terms of trying to get children hooked on sugar. Those are probably the two things that come to mind, and it's not American bashing. I'm just saying, like, there's so much.
Hold on. Not all the processed food companies from the States. There are some from Europe too. So
okay, fair. I'm just saying, you don't. If you're from America, you don't want that to be your legacy. Like, come on, there was so much good that came out of America. So much.
I know, but we can be the leaders to change this thing. A little funny story, and I'll tell you, it's like, I've been to Colombia now, and I'll soon have my Colombian residence permanent. I'll be a citizen. And what I'm trying to do now is I want to get the book turned to Spanish, but I'm going to be reaching out next year to the Colombian health authorities. And I would love to see Colombia to be the first country in the world to tell its people the truth about sugar and do what needs to treat it like tobacco. I think it'd be so cool, for my new country to do this. Somebody's going to do it. Why not Colombia, So that's one of my goals.
Why not? Some community, some municipal city. I tried to do this at my municipal level. I actually tried to build into, I just didn't get it. I didn't get anywhere. No. But someone's going to do it, right? The blue zone thing is kind of catching on. And of course, they're not quite fully, no sugar, no processed foods, but that'll probably come in. But yeah, some countries going to do it. Finland has done really good stuff around nutrition. They have brought themselves down from the highest rate of heart disease to one of the lowest in the world. How did they do it? Two things. The government at the federal level, at the national level, said you need to eat better and move more. And they created this whole culture around it. And it was very impactful. And if you look at the stats, it's like, it works. It works. Now the World Health Organization in 1989 said, here's the deal. We've looked at the medical evidence. Countries, you need to go back and set policies in place that make sure that men consume no more than 9 teaspoons, women no more than 6, ideally less. They agreed. Didn't happen. 2014, they brought them together again. The Rome Declaration of Nutrition, 2014, I think it was 142 countries signed the declaration that said they would go back to their countries, set policies in place that men would consume no more, that would enable or support the achievement of no more than 9 teaspoons for men, no more than 6 for women. Not a single country in the world has come even anywhere close to achieving those targets. And the reason is big money, but also because it's addictive. Because it is so...
Well, as I said, I have my chapter on KISS, and I have a quiz in there in the book. And the quiz basically is, all right, here's what I want to do. I want to ask you a question. Here's 5 things that if you do this, if you don't eat these five things, then your life will be immeasurably better. The rest, you'll be set for life. The first one is strychnine. The second one is rat poison. The third one is cockroaches, dead cockroaches. The
Dead
fourth one
ones.
is cow feces. And the last one is sugar. So if you quit those five things, you'll be so happy and so healthy, and your life will change, and you won't be depressed. Everything's gonna be great. But I also say, if you're going to have to eat one of those five things, which one can you eat? And it's, of course, the cockroaches, which are protein. I suggest you put them in the microwave first before you eat them. But at least you can eat them. They're not going to hurt you like the sugar will. But the point is, you got to take poison out of your diet. That's what you got to do. Because as Dr. Johnson said, the human body wasn't designed for this. It's been around for millions of years, but it wasn't designed to metabolize sugar. Fructose is a poison. It goes to the liver to be processed. And the body, and it may take us another 1,000 years to evolve that, but right now the body is not designed to eat sugar. It's just that simple. Never has been. And yet the sugar has flooded us the last 100 years, and it's killing us. And it's killing us slowly, sweetly, and softly.
Mm-hmm. And I might add, for people who find that idea like depressing and daunting, and they're like, oh God, that's too extreme and that's impossible. I'll leave you with this thought that actually sugar shows up in all plant foods, all of them. Every plant food you eat has glucose in it. But
Sure.
it comes within the context of this brilliant package of fiber and phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and so much goodness, a little bit of sugar, an ocean of goodness. But what we've done in our modern day sugar is we've taken all the good stuff, the fiber and the phytonutrients, the vitamins, minerals, all of it. And all we've done is concentrate the sugar. So it's not like we're asking you to never again have the pleasure of sugar. You're just going to have the pleasure of sugar in the context of whole foods. And one day you will taste iceberg lettuce and go, dang, that's sweet. Or an almond or Brussels sprouts are stupidly sweet. They will be plenty satisfying. Sugar, with the little tiny bits that shows up in all plant foods, is plenty satisfying once you get yourself unhooked. So don't despair that you're going to go without. You won't. But the sugar Rich and I are talking about is the stuff that's concentrated and processed and no longer is good. It is nothing but poison.
100% right. And you mentioned vegetables, also fruit applies.
Yeah.
But as Dr. Lustig says, and I love his expression, is, you got to feed the gut, and protect the liver. And processed foods and sugar do neither of that. Neither. And this whole evolving study of the biome is new and fascinating. But all I know is you've got 1 trillion bacteria down there. If you don't feed them, they do a lot of bad stuff. And by not giving them fiber, by giving them processed foods and sugar, you're not feeding them. And once they get like that, that blood-brain barrier and let leaky gut, a lot of things happen with the brain and depression. The science is there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's everything I think about now. I says, hey, is it going to help my gut? Is it going to help my, protect my liver? And he's absolutely right. There's just no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way the body works so great. I mean, 7 days, my feet went normal. The body is this great, incredible creative, and all we're doing is killing it with the sugar, and the kids.
Yes. Everybody, please go out and get your book. It's on Amazon. It's not yet on Audible, but we'll get it there one day. We need to show an agent that this is a bestseller already. Please go get this book, pass it, buy it for people for Christmas. It's the least we can do. Rich, is there any final words you'd like to share today before we wrap up?
Yeah, there is. And I closed in the book with this basically. And I said, look, I was dead man walking, 8, 10 years ago. And I'm almost 80 now. And I got to thinking, wow, I got my health. I got some experience. I got some knowledge. I got a little money in the bank. The last quarter of my life has been my best quarter. And anybody can have the best quarter. You don't have to have the last quarter be in the worst quarter all the time in the hospitals, the doctors, the pills, the surgeries, the pain, the agony. It can be your best quarter as long as you got your health. And I wish everybody reads this book, and I wish the last quarter of your life would be your best quarter.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. Thank you for your book, for your inspiration. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in this week. If you would like more interviews, more information, and more inspiration on how to break up with sugar, go to my YouTube channel, Kick Sugar Coach, or my website, kicksugarcoach.com. See you next week.